Picture this. Something breaks. Your car, your relationship, your mental health, your career trajectory. And your first instinct isn't to call someone. It's to quietly start researching. At midnight. Alone. Because asking for help feels like a confession of something you'd rather not admit. If that's you, good. This video is for you, and I'm not going to tell you that you have a problem. Here's what most psychology content gets completely wrong about people who don't ask for help. They treat it as a disorder, a coping deficit, something to be fixed through better communication workshops and vulnerability exercises. But what if it's not a flaw? What if the brain that silently figures things out, the one that would rather suffer in quiet competence than make itself a burden? What if that brain is operating from a deeply sophisticated, deeply human place? Here's what nobody tells you about why some people never ask for help. The first thing to understand is that this isn't random personality variation. It's wired in. Research from UCLA's social neuroscience lab found that for certain individuals, the act of asking for help activates the same threat response in the brain as physical danger. Not metaphorically, literally. The amygdala fires, cortisol spikes. The nervous system reads, "I need help," as equivalent to, "I am vulnerable to attack." And here's why that matters. You're not being dramatic. Your brain is doing something very specific. It's protecting you. From what? From something that probably happened before you were old enough to consciously remember deciding anything. Developmental psychology calls this the formation of your attachment style, the invisible operating system installed in early childhood that determines how you relate to dependency and need. If the people who are supposed to show up for you were inconsistent, dismissive, or simply overwhelmed, your brain made a very logical calculation. Needing people is unsafe. Handling it yourself is the only guaranteed option. And that calculation didn't disappear when you grew up. It just moved underground. There's also something happening on a neurochemical level that doesn't get nearly enough attention. People who habitually self-solve tend to have a dopamine system that's unusually responsive to mastery. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with reward and motivation, gets released not just when you achieve something, but when you figure something out. When you solve the problem yourself, the reward signal is stronger than if someone handed you the solution. This is backed by research from the Max Planck Institute on intrinsic motivation and the neuroscience of autonomy. Turns out, for a specific subset of people, independent problem solving isn't just a habit. It's neurologically rewarding in a way that asking for help isn't. Think about the last time you spent 3 hours untangling something that you could have asked someone about in 10 minutes. There was something satisfying about it, wasn't there? Even if you were also exhausted and frustrated. You solved it. You. Not someone else. That's not stubbornness. That's your dopamine system doing exactly what it was calibrated to do. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and where most people stop the analysis too early. There's a phenomenon in psychology called the helper's dilemma, when you have a highly attuned sense of how much other people carry. Their workload, their emotional bandwidth, their own struggles, asking becomes almost painful, not because you're weak, but because you feel it too clearly. Mirror neurons, the neural circuits responsible for empathy and social attunement, tend to be more active in people who report reluctance to ask for help. A 2019 study published in Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience found that heightened mirror neuron activity correlates strongly with what researchers called burden sensitivity. Essentially, you can feel your request landing on someone before you even make it. You already know they're tired. You already ran the mental calculation on whether this is worth their time. You already decided it wasn't. And you did all of that in about 2 seconds without even noticing. Most people would call that being emotionally avoidant. I'd call it being over-empathic. Those are very different things. Let's talk about the identity piece because this one goes deep. For people who never ask for help, self-sufficiency isn't just a behavior. It's a core part of how they understand themselves. Psychologists call this self-concept integration, the degree to which a trait becomes fused with your identity rather than just describing a behavior. When being capable is who you are, asking for help doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like a fundamental threat to your sense of self. Like being exposed, like suddenly becoming someone you don't recognize. This is why simply being told, just ask for help, it's not a big deal, doesn't work. Because for you, it is a big deal. It's not a transactional exchange of information, it's a renegotiation of identity. And here's the reframe. That level of identity investment in self-sufficiency, It's often what makes people like this genuinely exceptional at things. The same neural pathway that makes asking feel impossible is the one that makes quitting feel unthinkable. The same architecture that produces "I can't need anyone" also produces "I will figure this out no matter how long it takes." Your greatest strength and your most persistent struggle often share the same source code. There's also the trust dimension, and this one is underrated. Research on interpersonal trust, specifically work out of the University of Amsterdam on what makes people reluctant to delegate or disclose, found something counterintuitive. People who rarely ask for help often have higher standards for help. It's not that you don't trust people, it's that you've internalized a very specific model of what good help looks like. And that model is detailed, careful, and rarely met by the kind of casual, "just let me know if you need anything" offers that most people make. You don't want help. You want the right help. And because you've learned that the right help is hard to find, asking feels riskier than just handling it yourself. You're not closed off. You're selective, which, again, sounds like a flaw until you realize that most of the highest functioning people you know operate this way. I want to be honest about something here because I'm not just here to tell you what you want to hear. There are real costs to this. The research is clear. People who consistently refuse to ask for help tend to carry a heavier cognitive load, experience more accumulated stress, and sometimes build walls so effective that genuine intimacy becomes genuinely difficult. The same architecture that makes you self-sufficient can make you unreachable, and that's worth sitting with. I'm not saying one way of being is better than the other, but I'm saying there are legitimate psychological reasons why some people operate this way, and understanding those reasons is more useful than labeling it as a character defect. Here's what all of this actually means when you zoom out. The person who never asks for help isn't emotionally stunted. They're not damaged, they're not avoidant, and they're not secretly terrified of connection. At least not always. Often, they're someone whose nervous system learned to treat self-sufficiency as the safest, most reliable form of love they could give themselves. Their dopamine system rewards mastery. Their empathy makes them hyper aware of the cost their needs place on others. Their identity is threaded through with competence the way other people's might be threaded through kindness or humor. And their standards for real support are genuinely high. None of that is a problem to fix. It's a psychology to understand. You've probably spent a lot of your life being told, in one way or another, that the way you handle things is too closed, too private, too self-reliant. And maybe sometimes that's true. But more often, you've been quietly carrying things that most people would have asked for help with 3 weeks ago. And you handled it. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot.